Good evening. How's everybody this evening?
Good.
Now the brother says he likes the cold. I'd rather go back to Bolivia where it's not quite so cold. Anyway, my wife was just reminding me coming, and also last Sunday. Whoops, what did I do? I guess I didn't have it hooked in there very well. That, do you remember what we studied on Sunday? Must be that I'm going to have to review. What did we study on Sunday?
David and Jonathan. Yeah.
You must have been listening. Well, we did a change on it because I didn't want to miss this part of the study on the video, so that's why we changed it. But it was interesting. Ruth was reminding me that we did the study. I can't remember what town was that we went to. Oh, Portachuelo. Yeah, we did the studies there, and I did the story of David and Mephibosheth. And then when we got done, there was a lady that was expecting, and she named that child Mephibosheth when it was born. And he became a doctor, believe it or not. So it was really something. But impressed her so much for the study that she wanted to make her child that name. So anyway, it was a really blessing. Okay, where are we now? I'm going to wring your necks if you don't remember. Where are we in the study? Remember? Well, we're going to take a whole half an hour to remember.
Jacob meets Esau. Did we do that already?
Yeah, okay, we did that part exactly. Okay. I'd like to just review just a minute here in chapter 28 when Jacob was fleeing from his brother. It says here, verse 13, chapter 28, verse 13. And he said he dreamed, by the way, how was his pillow that night? Really comfortable, wasn't it? Okay, it says here, and behold, the Lord stood above it, and he said, I am the Lord God of Abraham, thy father, and the God of Isaac. The land wherein thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, to the east, to the north, and to the south. And in thee thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And that takes us back to where? Remember what the promise was that God made to Abraham? A blessing to all people, right? And it takes us back to chapter 3, verse 15, where God promised that one day the coming Savior would destroy Satan, doesn't it? So we've been looking for that now. Now it says in verse 15, and keep in mind to what kind of a person is God saying this here? What does it say in verse 15?
Behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest. I will bring thee again into this land, for I will not leave thee till I have done that which I have spoken to thee.
What kind of person was God saying that to? A real good guy, right? A real rascal. Exactly. And we've seen not only can you lie by not telling the truth, but even by the smell in the field, can't you? We saw that, how Jacob did that. And it says here, and God said, I will not leave thee until I have done what I said to thee. Very interesting, okay? We come to verse 16, and Jacob woke out of his sleep, and he said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. And he was afraid. By the way, should he have been afraid? What about us when God is near, when his presence? We need to think about that as well, don't we? Well, we come back here now to chapter chapter 34, or 33, I should say. And when Jacob finally comes out and has to meet his brother, of course, you know, he's still conniving. He's still finding some way he can flee. He can't go back to Laban, can he? Because of that promise that they made. So he can't go back. Neither can he go forward because they got to beat his brother. And so you know what happened there. And God finally touched his leg, and he limped from there on. In other words, he can't flee anymore, can he? But that was where God changed his name in verse 28. What does he change his name to?
Israel.
By the way, do we hear that name today? Why? It had its beginning right here when God changed Jacob's name, the supplanter, to Israel. Very interesting, okay? And so with that place there, he called it Peniel, for I have seen the Lord face to face, and my life has been preserved, okay? Well, then, finally, he does meet Esau, and very interesting, it says here in verse 4. What was their reaction when they saw each other in verse 4?
Esau ran to meet him, embraced him, and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept.
They wept. Wasn't that something? You think God was working in Esau's heart as well? Because before Jacob left, what Esau's plan was? I'm going to kill him. Okay? So God was working also in Esau's heart, wasn't he? And so they came back together, and they finally separated. Of course, Jacob wanted to give Esau something, but Esau said, no, that's fine. But then we come to verse 18 of chapter 33. And what does it say there in verse 18?
Then Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Paddan Aram. And he pitched his tent before the city.
You know how we say that in Spanish, where it says here he came. Actually, the Spanish reads, llegó sano y salvo. That means he arrived safe and sound. By the way, did God fulfill his word? He sure did, didn't he? Please keep that in mind. Now, that doesn't mean that Jacob's not going to reap some consequences, does it? Because when we read on here in chapter 34, Dina, as we call her in Spanish, she went out to visit some people, and in the process, in verse 2, what happens? What happens in verse 2? Chapter 34, verse 2.
And when Shechem the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and defiled her.
Wow. She went out to visit and ended up being violated by this man. Well, when it got back to Jacob, what happened here, it says in verse 7, what happened there? Verse 7.
And the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they had heard it, and the men were grieved. And they were very wroth, because he had wrought folly in Israel, and lying with Jacob's daughter, which thing ought not to be done.
Sure, por supuesto, of course. Sorry. I was going to spell out every once in a while. Sorry about that. Anyway, so they were very wroth. They were very angry at what this man had done to their sister, hadn't they? Well, as we see here, they went to visit this man, and Shechem told him, he says in verse 11, let me find grace in your eyes, and what ye shall say unto me I will give, because he wanted to take this girl. Well, they said, we can't do that because we are circumcised. Only if you become circumcised, then you can do that. We're going to see whether it was true or not. So Simeon, wasn't it Simeon? Yeah, Simeon and Levi. By the way, what sons were they? They were the second and third sons. Don't forget that, okay? What did they do? What was it? Shechem said he had all the males, had them circumcised. But it says on the third day, when they were in great pain, It says here in verse 25. What does it say, verse 25?
And it came to pass on the third day, when they were sore, that two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brethren, took each man his sword, and came upon the city boldly, and slew all the males.
In verse 26.
And they slew Hamor and Shechem's son with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house, and went out.
By the way, do you think that was a good thing they did? There was one that should have been chastised, but they did it to all the men. Okay? They did all, and God is going to show us a little bit what Jacob's family is like. We need to keep that in mind. Okay? And so when they end up taking all their wives, all their cattle, they belonged to that other company of people. And then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "Ye have troubled me to make me odious among the inhabitants of the land." When other people hear this, they're going to come together and they're going to destroy me. Well, their reasoning was, should he deal with our sister as with a harlot? And of course not. But it wasn't right for them to take it to the other extreme either, was it? So keep that in mind. Simeon and Levi, the second and third sons of Jacob. Okay? Chapter 25, it says here, verse 2, "Then Jacob said unto his household, and to all that were with him, Put away the foreign gods that are among you, and be clean, and change your garments." Why did he say that? Remember what happened in the story? When he was trying to escape from Laban, what did Rachel do?
Brought some of her father's gods.
Yeah, and set on him on the camel, didn't it? So he couldn't find them. But here Jacob's telling him, get rid of the idols. Okay? So keep that in mind. All right, we go over here to verse 16. Now remember, how many wives did Jacob have? Well, there's really two, but he had the concubines as well, so there's 4. And there's 11 sons. But we're going to come to the 12th son right now in verse 16. And what does it say there in verse 16? Somebody help me with that. Through verse 18.
When they journeyed from Bethel, they were still some distance from Ephrath. Rachel went into labor, and she had hard labor. And when her labor was at its hardest, the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, for you have another son." And as her soul was departing, for she was dying, she called his name Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin.
Muy bien. Okay, this is the 12th son of Jacob. He's called Benjamin. Okay? Now that name that she put on her son, Benoni, really means the son of my sorrow. That's what it really means. Okay? But Jacob changed it to Benjamin. All right, look at verses 21 and 22, please. What happens there?
Then Israel journeyed and pitched his tent beyond the tower of Eder. And it happened when Israel dwelt in that land that Reuben went and lay with his father's concubine, and Israel heard about it.
What? What happened? Who was Reuben?
Firstborn.
The firstborn. Please keep that in mind for something later on. It's very important. But he went and lay with his father's concubine. What was it? What was her name? Bilhah. Okay? Let's jump over here. Now we come to Isaac's death. By the way, I appreciated Sam the other night. He was bringing out that I had mentioned that Rebecca had died, that Jacob hadn't seen her, but he was bringing that out. Even though it just mentions the house of somebody, that doesn't mean that the wife was dead. So it's very possible that Rebecca was still alive when Jacob came back. Okay, So I wanted to correct that. Thank you, Sam, for helping me understand that, okay? All right. So anyway, chapter 36, just quickly, I'll let you read that. It talks about the descendants or generations of Esau. Now let's hop over to chapter 37, okay? Chapter 37, verse 1. I want somebody to help me read these passages here, please. Chapter 37, verse 1.
Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan.
Go ahead.
These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing a flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report out of them to their father.
Oh, what? By the way, who were these? They were Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. Say what Joseph said was what? What was the character of these people? These four sons of Jacob. According to that, he says he brought an evil report. In other words, they were not conducting themselves as they should today. So here we have Jacob's sons. By the way, whatever a man soweth, that shall he also what? Reap. Don't forget it, okay? So now it says in verse 3, keep reading, brother.
Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors.
Oh, by the way, what did Isaac do to Esau and Jacob?
Show favoritism.
And what is he doing here? Is Jacob doing here? The same thing. In fact, to even show it, he made him a coat of many colors to show his favoritism, didn't he? Well, did that set well with the other ones? Verse 4, what does it say?
When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him.
Wow. By the way, what kind of a family does Jacob have? Beautiful, isn't it? And by the way, the Savior's got to come from this family. Keep that in mind. Okay? And so it says here in verse 5, Joseph had a couple dreams, didn't he? Somebody read those dreams for me, please.
Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheep in the field, and behold, my sheep arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheep gathered around it and bowed down to my sheep."
Wow. I don't think we know what sheaves are today, do we? Because we have balers, we have choppers, and all that kind of stuff. What they used to do, and we still do it in Moromoro, where we used to live, they would go out and cut with a hand sickle, cut the grain, and bind it together and make sheaves, tied it together, and make sheaves, and then later on they would take it to what they call an era. That means a place where they would use animals to thresh out the grain. But these sheaves, so what he saw like 12 sheaves, but one sheaf stood straight, and the other 11 bowed down to his sheaf. Okay? Let's keep going. Verse 8 now.
His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words.
Keep reading.
Then he dreamed another dream, and told it to his brothers, and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream, and behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind.
By the way, do you think Joseph at that time understood or knew the interpretation of the dream? No. Please keep that in mind for something that's going to happen later on. Very interesting, okay? Okay, and so it says here in verse 12, somebody continue reading, please. Verse 12 on.
And his brethren went to feed their father's flock in Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, Do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them. And he said to him, Here am I. And he said to him, Go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem.
Okay, let's look at the map here just a minute. Okay, Hebron, you can see down here, that's where they were living. And so Jacob says, I want you to go and see my kids up here in Shechem. Now please keep this in mind. Exactly more or less 72 miles is what he had to walk. All right? But it says here in verse 14, it says, Go, I pray thee, see whether it is well with thy brethren or not. Why do you think Jacob was so concerned?
Probably somewhat knew their character.
He knew their character, didn't he?
They just got done killing a whole town of guys.
Yeah. And then besides that, the firstborn lays with Jacob's concubine, doesn't he? Really nice family, isn't it? Okay? Keep those things in mind, please. And so it says here, he came up here to Shechem. And when he got there, his brothers were not there anymore. You see where Shechem is up here? Okay? They weren't there. Now let's read this carefully. And it says here, And a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, What seekest thou? And he said, I seek my brethren. Tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks. Now be careful. And it says, the man said, They are departed from here, for I heard them say, Let us go to where? See where Dothan is up here? Now I want to ask you a question. Supposing it had been a man that found him and had not heard about his brothers, what would have happened? They probably would have sent him back home. But it was precisely that man that found Joseph, was wandering there, and he had heard his brother say, Let's go to Dothan. But why Dothan? Why is that? Well, let's keep reading. And it says here, and when they, for I heard them, let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went up to his brethren and found them in Dothan. Okay? And when they saw him afar off, by the way, how did they know him afar off? That privileged son, wasn't it? Okay? And it says, when they saw him afar off, even before he came near to them, they conspired against him to slay him. And they said to one another, Behold, this dreamer cometh. Keep that in mind. Okay? Come now, therefore, let us slay him and cast him into some pit. And we will say, Some evil beast hath devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. Okay? Now, verse 21, what does it say there?
But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, Let us not kill him.
Okay, who was Reuben?
Firstborn.
And what was the responsibility? In the absence of the father, he had charge of his brothers, didn't he? And so even though Reuben hates his brother, he realizes he has a responsibility to deliver him. Okay? Let's keep reading now. What happens there? In verse 22,
Reuben said to them, Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he may deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his home.
so Reuben was thinking what?
I'll save him and take him back.
He didn't say that to his brothers, but that was what he's thinking in his heart, wasn't he? Okay, what happens here? And it came to pass, when Joseph was come unto his brethren, that they stripped Joseph of his coat of many colors that were on him. Now remember, Joseph is 17 years old. Please keep that in mind. That's important for later on. Okay? They stripped him of his coat, and they took him and cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty. There was no water in it. That was by chance, wasn't it? Do you think somebody's kind of guiding things here a little bit? Please keep it in mind. All these steps are very important. And it said that, and they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of the Ishmaelites came from, by the way, who are the Ishmaelites?
Descendants of Ishmael.
Brothers.
Okay, all right, let's keep reading. Came from Gilead, which is up here further, in this direction here, over here, came from Gilead to Dothan, and down they were going to where? By the way, why was it that day that they weren't going from Egypt to Gilead? Chance? We understand it, folks. We need to stop and think. God is Armano. How do you say that, honey?
Sovereign.
Well, yeah, he's sovereign, but he's preparing. That's the word I want. Yeah, preparing. Okay? So we need to keep these things, and we need to ask questions. What would have happened? Why did it happen this way? Okay? Let's keep going here. And said that there, and Judah, by the way, who was Judah?
Another son.
He was the fourth son of Leah, wasn't he? Remember? She had the first four sons, okay? And Judah said unto his brother, what profit is it we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. And he is our brother and our flesh. Oh boy, isn't that wonderful? He is our brother. Let's treat him really well. By the way, what kind of family did Jacob have? And it says, and his brethren were content. Then there passed by Midianites, merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. By the way, let's go back here just a minute to Genesis chapter 15, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, chapter 15, verse 13. What does verse 13 say?
And the Lord said to Abram, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years.
So, in other words, God was already telling Abraham what was going to happen, didn't he? Of course, Abraham didn't know the details, but we're seeing what the details are in this part of the story. Okay, let's get back here to chapter 20, what was it, 37? And let's read here in verse 29. What does it say in verse 29 now?
And Reuben returned unto the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and he rent his clothes.
Oh, why do you think he did that?
He was upset.
Yeah, but he's got to give an answer to who? To his father. And so now what is he going to do? Well, let's read here.
And he returned to his brethren and said, that the child is not, and I, whither shall I go? And they took Joseph's coat and killed a kid of the goats, and they dipped the coat in the blood.
They killed that kid and dipped it in the blood, his coat. Now listen what they say here in verse 32. And they sent a coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, this we have found, know now whether it be thy son's or not. What's happening here?
Or half-truths.
But did they know it was their brothers? Sure they did. But they're making like they didn't know it. And now they're saying, Dad, I don't know if you're going to recognize this and not see if this is your sons. And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's coat, an evil beast hath devoured him. Joseph is thou torn in pieces." And Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth upon his loins and mourned for his son many days. Verse 35, please. What does it say there?
And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him. He refused to be comforted. He said, "For I will go down into the grave."
What are they doing?
They're trying to comfort him.
Oh, Dad, we're so sorry this happened to Joseph. I don't know why it happened that way. By the way, how did Joseph deceive his father? Interesting. Please keep that in mind, okay? And it says here, "For I will go down into Sheol unto my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. And the Midianites sold him into Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's, and the captain of his guard. Chapter 38. Some more things to think about. Verse 1. What happens here, please? Somebody help me. Read through a few verses here.
It came to pass at the time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there was a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and married her and went into her.
Okay? Shua was a Canaanite. Okay? And Judah goes into her, and this is what happens here in verse 3.
So she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, she called his name Onan. And she conceived yet again and bore a son, and called his name Shelah. He was at Chesed when she bore him.
Okay, verse 6.
Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him.
What? What? What's happening here? What kind of a family does Judah have? He said, but he's wicked and God took his life away. Wow. Keep that in mind. So what happens here in the next verse? Verse 8.
And Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife, marry her, and raise up an heir to your brother." But Onan knew that the heir would not be his, and it came to pass when he went into his brother's wife that he admitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, therefore he killed him also.
Wow. Two sons of Judah? Are we catching that? Really good men, aren't they? Well, let's see what happens here now.
Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown." For he said, lest he also die like his brothers. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. Now in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted and went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah. He and his friend Hira the Adullamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, "Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep." So she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place which was on the way to Timnah, for she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given to him as a wife.
So in other words, the third son of Jacob should have been given to this lady, shouldn't he? But he was careless and didn't do it. And so Tamar, as we say in Spanish, she dressed herself and gave herself as a harlot. Let's read what goes on here. What does it say, verse 15?
When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot because she had covered her face. Then he turned to her by the way and said, Please let me come into you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, What will you give me that you may come into me? And he said, I will give you a goat from the flock. So she said, Will you give me a pledge till you send it?
In other words, she's asking for a harlot's wage. And he says, I'll give you a goat from the flock. But he doesn't have it. So she says, well, give me what you have right now as a pledge. Keep reading.
Then he said, What pledge shall I give you? So she said, Your signet and cord and your staff that is in your hand. And he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. So
Okay. He gave her three things. Please keep that in mind. What was that? Thy signet?
Cord and your staff.
Okay, three things. Now she has those in her possession. And so Judah goes into her and lays with her and conceives in her. Let's go on. What happens now?
So she arose and went away and laid aside her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend, the Adullamite, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he did not find her. Then he asked the man of that place, saying, Where is the harlot who was openly by the roadside? And they said, There was no harlot in this place. So he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. Also the men of that place said, There was no harlot in this place. Then Judah said, Let her take them for herself, lest we be shamed. For I sent this young goat, and you have not found her.
Okay. Right now, everything seems fine. But 3 months later, what happens? In verse 24.
And it came to pass about 3 months after that Judah was told, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry. So Judah said, Bring her out and let her be burned.
Ooh. What? We're very quick to judge somebody else, aren't we? And that's what he's doing right here. But when she appears, what does she bring out? Those three things. Let's keep reading.
When she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, By the man whom these belong, I am with child. And she said, Please determine whose these are, the signet and cord and staff. So Judah acknowledged them and said, She has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Sheba, my son. And he never knew her again. So in other words, Judah was very careless, wasn't he? He should have given his last son to her. But because he didn't, she used his trick to get a child. By the way, what kind of family does Jacob have?
A bunch of deceivers like he was.
Exactly. Whatever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Okay? Let's keep reading on here just a little bit more. Verse 27.
Now it came to pass at the time for giving birth that she beheld twins, twins were in her womb. And so it was when she was given birth that the one put his hand out, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, This one came out first. And it happened that he drew back his hand, that his brother came out unexpectedly. And she said, How did you break through? This breach be upon you. Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah.
Okay? Please keep this name in mind, Perez. P-E-R-E-Z. That is very important for something later on. Okay? Keep these names in mind. It's very, very important. Okay, let's go on to chapter 39. We're just going to touch it just a little bit, but I want to see a comparison here. In verse 1, Dave, would you mind helping us with that, those verses?
I'm a little lost. Where are you?
39:1.
39, back to 39. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught that he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, Lie with me. But he refused, and said unto his master's wife, Behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?
Are we catching the picture? Is there a difference between Joseph and the other brothers? Remember now, Joseph's of a long ways from home. He was sold as a slave, and he could have just said to that woman, well, that's fine. Nobody's going to see me. But it says that he feared God. Do you see a difference between Joseph and his brothers here? A great difference. And by the way, which one of the brothers would you have chosen to bring the Savior into the world?
Humanly speaking, Joseph.
Humanly speaking, Joseph, exactly. Well, let's continue on here to see what happens here. Verse 10.
And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her.
Wow. Did it happen just once? Daily. That woman said, come and sleep with me. Continue on.
And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled, and got him out. And it came to pass when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house, and spake unto them, saying, See, he hath brought in an Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice.
What is happening here anyway? By the way, now that she's got the quote in her hands, she's got a problem, doesn't she? Because now she's going to have to respond to her husband. And so she's going to use this against Joseph. Please keep that in mind. You know, God allows adversity, but he does not make evil. Let's keep that in mind. He allows adversity, but he doesn't make evil. Okay? And it says here, when this happened, what happened? Continue reading, Dave.
And it came to pass when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. And she spake unto him according to these words, saying, The Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came in unto me to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass when his father heard the word, came to pass when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison.
One question. Why was it there in prison? In other words, it indicates that there were other prisons there as well. Why was it there? Well, folks, keep in mind, that was a special place that Joseph was placed. Please keep that in mind. And then it's in verse 21, Dave.
But the Lord was with Joseph, and showed him mercy, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper.
Is there a chance? We're going to see the things that are happening. We're going to see this later on. Next, Lord willing, Sunday, we're going to continue on and see how all these things come together. But remember now, Joseph was 17 years old when he was sold. He's now living in another country that does not speak Hebrew. He's learning their language. Please keep that in mind. This is very important for something later on. So he's speaking the language of the Egyptians. All right? Keep that in mind, please. Okay? Any questions? Or was it clear? Or did it make it more muddy? Okay?
Make it a bigger mess than it already is.
Yeah, I guess not. Okay. Brother, would you lead us in prayer, please?